What if I told you, the love of your life could return after 50 years of silence? What if you could meet them again, not in a movie, not in a dream, but in real life? I used to believe love had an expiration date, that after a certain age, your heart just slows down. But then, at 73, wearing a simple white dress, I walked down the aisle, toward the man I had loved since I was 18. No grand fairy tale, no dramatic movie moment, just two wrinkled hands finding their way back to each other. This is not just my story. This is a story about time, second chances, and the kind of love that never truly disappears. In the next few minutes, you'll hear how life pulled us apart, how silence lasted for decades, and how one unexpected message brought everything back. Memories, feelings, even the scent of that old summer evening when it all began. Whether you're 18 or 80, if you've ever loved and lost, this story is for you. So stay with me, because what happened next was something even I couldn't have imagined. I still remember the first time I saw him. He was standing under that old maple tree just outside the school library, reading a book like the rest of the world didn't exist. He wasn't the loudest. He wasn't the most handsome boy in class. But there was something in the way he turned the pages. Gentle, patient, present. I was 18, full of dreams and insecurities. He looked up, smiled, just briefly, and for some reason, my heart filed that moment away like it knew. Keep this. You'll need it someday. We never dated. We never even shared a real conversation back then. But somehow, that one moment became the quiet foundation of everything I thought love could be. You see, first love isn't always loud. Sometimes it's a whisper. Sometimes it's just a feeling you carry with you when life gets heavy. Years passed. I went on with my life. But whenever I felt lost, I would think of that afternoon, the light, the stillness, and that boy under the tree. I didn't chase him. I didn't even know if I'd ever see him again. But his memory stayed with me like a bookmark I never removed. And here's what I've learned. Love doesn't always start with fireworks. Sometimes, it starts with a soft smile and the way someone makes you feel seen, even if just for a second. They say time fades everything. But not that moment. Not that feeling. Not him. And as I built my life, chapter after chapter, I never imagined that one day, many years later, that boy from under the tree would reappear in the most unexpected way. Life has a strange way of taking us where we don't expect to go. And back then, at 18, we were standing at the edge of everything, but walking in completely different directions. I had dreams of becoming a teacher, while he was set on joining the Navy. He said he wanted to see the world before settling down. I said I wanted to stay close to home, take care of my little sister. We liked each other. That much was clear. But no one said anything. Not out loud. Maybe it was shyness. Maybe it was fear of ruining the unspoken sweetness between us. Or maybe, like many young people, we just assumed there would be time. I remember hearing a few months later that he had left for training. No goodbye, no note, just gone. And so, life went on. I went to college. He sailed off into the unknown. We faded from each other's lives as quietly as we had entered them. Looking back now, I realize, sometimes it's not the lack of love that keeps people apart. It's timing. It's life. It's youth. We were too young to understand that love, real love, doesn't knock twice unless you open the door the first time. But even so, he stayed in a quiet corner of my heart. Not as a regret, but as a what if. Years turned into decades. We built lives, made mistakes, found joy, felt heartbreak. And through it all, I never imagined we'd meet again. Until one ordinary afternoon, my inbox lit up with a name I hadn't seen in over 50 years. 50 years. It sounds like a lifetime, because it is. A lifetime of growing up. Growing old, without him. After he left for the Navy, I didn't hear from him again. No letters, no calls, nothing. And as time passed, so did my hope. I got married in my late 20s to a kind man. We had 2 children. We built a life full of quiet joys and the kind of love that grows from commitment and care. It wasn't the butterflies of first love, but it was real in its own way. And for many years, I thought that was enough. He, too, married, had a family, worked abroad for a long time. From what I later learned, there were birthdays, holidays, funerals, and never once did our paths cross. But here's the part one didn't expect. Every now and then, in the quietest moments, folding laundry, walking to the mailbox, waiting for the kettle to boil, his name would rise up in my mind like a whisper. Not in longing, not in regret, just a presence, a memory that hadn't asked to be remembered. But never quite left. Sometimes people ask me, did you ever try to find him? And honestly, I didn't. Because life was full, and also because a part of me was afraid. Afraid he wouldn't remember. Afraid I'd mean nothing. Afraid that maybe that moment under the maple tree was only mine. But now I know. Memories have a way of finding their way back when the time is right. And love, if it's true, doesn't always need tending. Sometimes, it just waits, quietly, patiently, until one day, it returns. And for me, that day came with a small ping on my laptop screen. An email from a name I hadn't spoken in half a century. And just like that, the silence was broken. It was a rainy Tuesday afternoon. Nothing special. I had just finished folding the last towel and sat down with a cup of tea. Ready to check my emails, mostly bills, newsletters, and the usual clutter. And then I saw it. A name. Familiar. Unmistakable. Not just familiar like an old friend. Familiar like a part of your own story suddenly appearing on the page again. It simply read, "Hi, I don't know if this is still your email, but if it is, I hope you remember me." My hands trembled. My heart did something it hadn't done in years. It raced. He had found me. He told me he had been thinking of me more often lately. Especially after retiring and losing his wife a few years prior. He said he had no idea where life had taken me. But something in him just needed to know. I sat with that message for nearly an hour before replying. Not because I didn't want to, but because I wanted to find the right words for a moment I never thought would come. And when I finally hit send, it felt like opening a door that had been closed for half a century. But the room inside was exactly as I remembered. We began writing long, thoughtful emails, like letters from another time. He asked about my children. I asked about his travels. We talked about books, old music, the maple tree outside the school library. Neither of us rushed. We weren't trying to reclaim the past. We were simply rediscovering each other, one memory at a time. It made me realize something. Sometimes, the past doesn't come back to haunt you. Sometimes, it comes back to heal you. And that's exactly what those messages did. They healed a part of me I didn't even know was still waiting. After weeks of writing, he asked if we could meet. Just coffee, no pressure. And that meeting would become a moment I would never forget. The moment everything changed. I arrived 10 minutes early. Sat by the window of the little cafe on Main Street. The same cafe that used to be a bookstore when we were young. Funny how some places change. And some just wait. I kept my hands wrapped around my cup of tea. Partly to warm them, partly to stop them from trembling. And then, he walked in. He looked different, of course. His hair had turned silver. His shoulders a little more rounded. But his eyes, those soft, thoughtful eyes, they were exactly the same. He smiled. I stood up. And for a moment, we both just stood there, not knowing what to say. It was awkward. Not the kind of awkward that makes you want to leave, but the kind that makes you realize just how much time has passed. 50 years of life between us. 50 years of stories we hadn't shared. Of birthdays missed, tears shed, laughter never heard. We sat down, talked about the weather, the cafe, our grandchildren, and then, out of nowhere, he pulled a folded piece of paper from his wallet. A photo of us, taken in high school, blurry, black and white, but unmistakably us. I've kept this all these years, he said, just in case I'd get to show it to you one day. That's when the ice melted. We talked for 2 hours straight. And still, it felt like we had just started. There was a rhythm, a quiet understanding. We were older, but something in us had stayed the same. Here's what I learned that day. Reunions aren't about picking up where you left off. They're about creating something new. With someone who already knows where you came from. Not everything fit perfectly. There were pauses, stories we couldn't fully explain. Grief we had both carried alone. But the silence was never uncomfortable. It was respectful, gentle, and when he walked me to my car, he didn't say anything poetic. He just looked at me and said, "I'm really glad I sent that email." So was I. That coffee meeting became a second one. Then a third. And slowly, quietly, we found ourselves falling into a kind of love neither of us expected. A love that would lead us somewhere we never thought we'd go again. It didn't happen all at once. There were no violins, no dramatic confessions under the rain. Just a series of small, quiet moments, the kind you don't notice until you realize you've started looking forward to them. Like how he always brought an extra muffin to our coffee meetings. Blueberry, because he remembered it was my favorite. Or how he'd walk me to my car and wait until I drove off. Waving like we were still 17 and time hadn't taken anything away from us. At 73, love feels different. It's not hurried. It doesn't need to prove itself with grand gestures. It just shows up, consistently, gently, without needing to be asked. We started seeing each other more often. Lunch on Tuesdays, evening walks on Fridays. Sometimes we just sit in the park and talk about nothing. And sometimes, that nothing felt like everything. He told me about his wife, how much he had loved her. How hard it was to lose her. I told him about my late husband, our life. Our children, the quiet grief that still lingered. There was no jealousy, no comparison, just understanding. And maybe that's the beauty of love at this age. We come with stories, with losses, with lines on our faces and aches in our bones. But we also come with a kind of softness. The kind that only life can teach. People often think falling in love is for the young. But I can tell you, falling in love at 73 felt just as real. Just as new. Just as tender. And maybe even more intentional. Because this time, we knew what it meant to lose. We knew not to take time for granted. Here's what I believe now. Love doesn't care how old you are. It only asks, are you open? Are you ready to feel again? And when he held my hand for the first time, no words. Just a quiet squeeze. I knew. We weren't rewriting an old story. We were writing a new one. That new chapter would take us somewhere neither of us expected. Down the aisle, once more. But this time, with all of life behind us. And everything that still mattered ahead. We didn't plan for a big wedding. In fact, we weren't even sure we wanted a wedding at all. But one afternoon, as we sat together on the porch watching the sun dip behind the trees, he turned to me and said, "I'd like to grow old with you properly, this time. Officially." And so we did. It was a small ceremony. Held in the garden behind my daughter's house. White folding chairs. A few strings of lights. My granddaughter played the piano. And the air smelled like jasmine and old dreams coming true. I wore a cream-colored dress, nothing fancy. He wore a navy suit and that same quiet smile I remembered from high school. When I walked toward him, there was no dramatic gasp from the crowd. But there were tears. Tears from our children, our friends, and yes, from us too. Some people said they'd never seen a wedding like it. Not because it was grand, but because it was grounded. Every face in that garden had lived through something. A loss, a second chance, a miracle. And that day, they witnessed all three wrapped in one. People came up to me afterward and whispered, "You've given us hope." And I realized, maybe this wasn't just our story. Maybe it was a reminder to everyone who had ever thought it was too late. Too late to love. Too late to start over. Too late to feel butterflies again. But it wasn't. And it never is. The wedding wasn't about making a promise for forever. At our age, forever feels different. It was about making the most of the time we still had. About choosing joy, again. And as we danced under the lights. Slow, steady, no rush. I knew this wasn't a new beginning. It was a continuation of something that had never truly ended. But even in happiness, life reminds you it's fragile. And the real beauty of love at this age is knowing how precious each moment is. Because what came after that wedding wasn't just romance. It was life. Real, imperfect, beautiful life, shared with someone who had waited half a century to hold your hand again. People often ask me, so, what's it like being married again at 73? And I smile, because the answer isn't simple. It's not flashy or dramatic. It's warm, quiet, steady, like a favorite sweater you forgot you had, until you wear it again and wonder why you ever took it off. Our days now are simple. We wake up early. He makes the coffee, 2 cups. Just the way I like it, strong, but not bitter. I read the paper out loud while he listens, sometimes correcting the headlines under his breath. He still brings me flowers, nothing fancy, just from the market down the street. And I still leave little notes in his lunchbox, even if he's just going to the backyard to fix something. We take walks in the evening, hands clasped like we're afraid to let go, because maybe, in some way, we are. Love at this age is different. It doesn't ask for more than you can give. It doesn't demand grand gestures. It's about presence, about showing up, every day, no matter how the knees feel or what the doctor said last week. It's about knowing someone will be there when you misplace your glasses again, when you need help with the garden hose, when the night feels a little too quiet. It's not about completing each other. We're already whole. It's about honoring the life behind us, and holding space for whatever time we have left. And sometimes, in those moments between the chores and the meals and the soft goodnights, I catch myself looking at him, thinking, how lucky am I that love found its way back? Because here's the truth. Love doesn't always arrive when we want it to. But if we're patient, if we stay open, it has a way of finding us anyway. And when it does, it teaches you things you never knew you needed to learn. Like how to forgive the years that felt empty, how to cherish the hours that feel full, and how to love without fear. Because now you understand just how fleeting life really is. But as peaceful as it was, this chapter of our story still held one more beautiful surprise. Something I never thought I'd experience again at this age. One evening, as we were sitting on the porch watching the sky fade from gold to blue, he turned to me and asked, if you could go back, what would you tell your 18-year-old self? I paused for a long time. Because that version of me, wide-eyed, unsure, dreaming big but scared of the world, still lived somewhere inside. I think I'd tell her this. Speak up. Say how you feel, even if your voice shakes. Don't wait for the perfect moment, because sometimes it never comes back. And if love appears at your door, even briefly, don't be afraid to open it. I'd also tell her, it's okay if life doesn't go as planned. It's okay to fall, to lose, to start again. Because someday, maybe decades later, you'll understand why things didn't work out the way you thought they should. And when I asked him the same question, he smiled, looked down at his hands, and said, I'd tell that boy under the maple tree, don't let her walk away without asking her name. We laughed, but there was a quiet truth in his words, a softness only time can give. Sometimes we think we have to get everything right when we're young, that our choices are permanent, that missing a moment means it's lost forever. But that's not always true. Some moments return. Some love stories just take longer to unfold. And if we had met again earlier, maybe in our 40s, or even our 50s, we might not have been ready. Not the way we are now. Because now, we love without needing to impress. We listen without waiting to reply. And we hold each other like we understand how rare that kind of connection truly is. So to anyone watching this, whether you're 18 or 80, know this. It's never too late. Not for healing, not for hope, and certainly, not for love. What we'd tell our younger selves is what we're finally learning to tell ourselves today. And maybe the greatest gift of this late chapter is the chance to write it together. With full hearts, open hands, and eyes that no longer look back in regret, but forward, in gratitude. Because sometimes, even after all those years, you still get to say, yes, to the one your heart never really said goodbye to. If someone had told me, back when I was standing under that maple tree at 18, that I'd wait more than 50 years to walk down the aisle with him, I probably would have laughed, or maybe cried, or maybe just stood there in quiet disbelief. But now, looking back, Every detour, every silence, every heartache, it all makes sense. Because it led me here. To the hand I now hold each morning. To the voice I hear when I laugh a little too loud. To the eyes that have aged, but still see me the same way they did so many years ago. Would I go through it all again? The waiting, the wondering, the years apart? Yes. 1,000 times, yes. Because now I know, love isn't about perfect timing. It's about choosing each other, when the time finally is right. We don't get to control every chapter of our lives. But sometimes, life surprises us with a page we thought had already been turned. And if you're listening to this, wondering if it's too late to start again, to reach out, to believe in love, I hope our story reminds you. It never is. You're never too old to feel butterflies. You're never too far gone to reconnect. And you're certainly never too late to say, I still choose you. So, if there's someone you've kept quietly in your heart, a memory, a name, a face you haven't forgotten, maybe today is the day to send that message, to make that call, to say what you never got the chance to say. Because sometimes, the best stories aren't the ones that happened when we were young, but the ones we're brave enough to write now. And if this story touched you in any way, I'd love to know. Have you ever had a love you never quite let go of? Tell me in the comments. And if you believe in second chances, like, share, or simply sit with someone you love a little longer tonight. Because love, at any age, is always worth saying yes to.